Every fortune in Wall Street begins with one question. How much should you risk? Not what to buy, not when to buy, but how much. Most traders never answer it, and that's why the market answers for them. I've seen men smarter than me lose everything because they ignored this question. And I've seen patient operators build empires because they respected it. This is the line between speculation and suicide. In this lesson, I'm going to show you the exact method I used to size every trade, the same rule that kept me in the game when others were wiped out. You'll learn how I decided when to pyramid, when to cut back, and how I made sure one bad trade could never ruin me again. If you've ever felt that the market takes your best ideas and turns them into losses, you'll see why the problem isn't your entries, it's your exposure. By the end, you'll understand how to control risk the same way I did, by never letting a single trade control you. Most traders think they lose because their analysis is wrong. That's not it. They lose because their position is wrong. They bet too heavy when they should wait. They double down when they should step aside. I made those same mistakes. I'd win big one week and lose it all the next, not because my judgment failed, but because my discipline did. Once I learned to size properly, the noise disappeared. I could sit, watch, and wait without fear. That's when trading stopped feeling like a gamble and started feeling like a profession. In this session, I'm going to take you through my Hashone rule for position sizing, the principle that turned my entire career around. We'll break down how I calculated my size on every trade, why most traders go broke even when they're right, the difference between pyramiding and overtrading, and the mental framework I use to protect capital while still pressing advantage. By the end, you'll see why controlling your size isn't just risk management, it's psychological freedom. I'll show you how one disciplined method can remove fear, stop revenge trading, and let you trade from strength, not hope. So, if you've ever looked at your account and thought, I was right, but I still lost, stay with me, because that ends here. Most people think trading is about making money. It isn't. It's about keeping it. You can't win a game you can't stay in. The truth is, no one loses in the market because they ran out of opportunities. They lose because they ran out of capital. And that's the first thing most traders never understand until it's too late. Here's something most people completely miss. The market doesn't punish you for being wrong. It punishes you for staying wrong. It's not the mistake that kills you. It's your refusal to survive it. I learned that long before I became known as a market operator. Back then, I was just a kid sitting in bucket shops, trading on chalkboards. I was fast, confident, and reckless. I'd double my account one week, lose it the next. The market didn't even notice. It just kept moving while I tried to rebuild what I'd destroyed through my own impatience. At that time, I thought success meant being right. I thought survival was for the cautious. But the truth was the opposite. The cautious man survives long enough to learn. The bold man dies with opinions. When I was 15, I made my first $1,000. It felt like a fortune. I walked home that day thinking I'd figured out the secret to the market. But a few weeks later, I gave it all back. Not because the market changed, but because I did. I stopped respecting risk the moment I thought I had mastered it. That was my first education in survival. The market isn't a teacher, it's a judge. It doesn't correct you. It eliminates you. If you've ever felt that sting, that hollow silence after a loss you thought you could control, you already know what I'm talking about. That moment when the screen goes red and you say, it'll come back. It doesn't. It never does. The market has no memory. The only memory that matters is yours and what you do with it next. Here's the math of ruin that most never recover from. When you lose 50% of your capital, you need 100% return just to break even. And most traders never come back because the moment they lose half, they also lose their nerve. That's the hidden tax of big losses. Not just money, but confidence. Once that's gone, you stop trading the market and start trading your own fear. Now, you might ask, so, how do I stay in the game? The answer is simple but not easy. You size every trade as if it could be your last. Because one day, it might be. I don't care how right you think you are, how perfect the setup looks, how strong your conviction feels. Your first job is not to win big. Your first job is to not go broke. You can't make sound decisions when your capital is bleeding. You can't think clearly when your next trade determines whether you can trade at all. That's why I say, never let a single position decide your future. Once you let one trade have that much power, you've already lost control. I remember standing in the gallery at a brokerage house once, watching the men on the floor during a market break. The room was chaos, voices shouting, paper flying, tickers spitting prices faster than eyes could read. But what struck me wasn't the noise. It was the faces of the operators who'd overtraded. Fear doesn't look like panic. It looks like stillness. They couldn't move, couldn't act, couldn't decide. They were frozen because they had no room left to survive. Here's the thing about survival. It's not glamorous. Nobody brags about the trade they didn't take. But that restraint is what keeps the lights on. Every professional I ever met, everyone who lasted more than a season had one thing in common. They protected their capital like a soldier guards his ammunition. Because once you run out, there's no fight left to fight. So if you're watching this and you've blown up accounts before, don't feel ashamed. Feel warned. That pain was your tuition. The market charges the same fee to everyone who ignores survival. The question is whether you pay it once or keep paying it forever. Think of your trading like a ship at sea. When the sky is calm, you can open your sails and move with confidence. But when the wind shifts and the water turns dark, you reef those sails fast. You don't challenge the storm. You respect it. A trader who sizes too large in bad conditions is no different from a captain who refuses to trim his canvas. Both end up underwater. What I'm about to share next might seem counterintuitive at first, but it's the real key to turning survival into strength. The goal isn't just to protect your capital, it's to preserve your ability to act. Because when you size correctly, you don't just survive the storm, you're ready to strike when the sky's clear. That's the part most traders miss. They're too busy chasing the next big move to notice the leaks in their own ship. But when you master the law of survival, every other part of the game gets easier. You stop fearing losses because you know they can't kill you. You stop chasing wins because you realize they'll come naturally when you're still standing while others are drowning. And once I understood that, once I learned that my survival depended not on being right, but on staying solvent long enough to be right, everything changed. Because the real game doesn't start until you can say, with full conviction, no single trade can take me out. That's when you stop being a gambler and start being an operator. Now that you understand the law of survival, the foundation that keeps you in the game, it's time to move to the next law, proportion. This is where most traders destroy themselves, not by emotion, but by math. They risk too much on the wrong idea and too little on the right one. And here's the irony. Most traders think the secret to success is finding better setups. It isn't. It's learning to size the setups you already have correctly. Let's talk about how that works, why it matters, and how to apply it before your next trade. Here's something most traders never stop to think about. They'll spend endless hours studying setups, patterns, indicators, and news, but they'll spend almost no time asking the single question that determines whether they survive or vanish. How much should I risk? You see, the market doesn't care about your logic, your reasoning, or your conviction. It cares only about your exposure. You can be completely right in your analysis and still go broke because you sized your trade wrong. I've seen it happen to men smarter, richer, and more connected than me. I've watched them ride brilliant ideas straight into ruin, simply because they never learned proportion, the balance between conviction and capital. When I say proportion, I'm not talking about playing safe for the sake of safety. I'm talking about power under control. The man who masters proportion can press when the odds are with him and pull back when they're not. The fool commits full strength on every move and wonders why he's always exhausted, always chasing, always one wrong turn away from ruin. The market isn't a casino where you double your bet to get even. It's a battlefield, and your capital is your ammunition. If you waste it on every small skirmish, you'll have nothing left when the real opportunity appears. When I was coming up, I used to think the way to make big money was to always trade big. I thought confidence was proof enough. If I felt sure, I'd go in heavy. But the market doesn't reward certainty. It rewards discipline. My early successes fooled me. I'd catch a move, press too hard, and by the time I realized I'd been right but too large, the recoil had already wiped me out. I was like a soldier charging forward without checking if he had enough bullets left to fight another day. And that's what most traders do. They win a few trades, mistake luck for skill, and start swinging bigger until one hit sends them back to zero. The truth is, you must divide your capital into parts not for diversification, but for preservation. I always kept a reserve. One portion for the initial entry, another for confirmation when the market proved me right, and the rest locked away, untouched, protected, because I knew the one rule that kept me alive longer than all my bright ideas: never commit all your capital at once. That reserve wasn't just money, it was freedom. It allowed me to think clearly, act decisively, and avoid desperation. A trader without reserves is a man without options, and a man without options is one bad trade away from extinction. Now, here's where most people fail. They think every trade deserves the same confidence. They risk the same amount on setups that barely qualify as they do on trades that practically scream opportunity. That's emotional laziness disguised as consistency. The truth is, confidence varies. So should exposure. The market has seasons, moments when it's clear, and moments when it's chaos. When conditions are perfect, you can size up slightly. When they're uncertain, you size down. That's proportion, matching your risk to the reality of the environment, not to the noise in your head. Let me give you an example. During the panic of 1907, the entire market was in free fall. Men who'd made fortunes in the prior years were wiped out in days. But I had reserves. I'd been waiting, patient, watching. When the chaos peaked and the others were trapped in their own leverage, I stepped in with calm precision. I didn't buy. Everything I bought small at first, tested the ground, and when the tape began to confirm strength, I increased my size gradually. While others prayed for rescue, I was prepared. That was proportion in action, measured commitment with the flexibility to adjust. Think of it like a general leading an army. He doesn't send every soldier into the first fight. He tests the enemy, probes their lines, watches their movement, and only when he finds weakness does he commit more troops. He knows that if he loses his entire force in one battle, there's no campaign left to win. The trader must think the same way. Your capital is your army. You must fight small, learn, and then strike large when the path clears. And the beauty of this discipline is that it removes the emotional drama. You don't have to guess whether you're right or wrong. Your sizing and your plan tell you what to do next. Now let me address something that stops most traders dead in their tracks. The illusion that being cautious means being weak. It's the opposite. Restraint isn't fear, it's control. The man who trades small while waiting for confirmation isn't timid. He's disciplined. He knows that his edge doesn't come from excitement but from patience. When you size properly, you can survive losing streaks without losing your confidence. You can make a series of small, controlled losses and still have full strength when the next real trend begins. Here's the math that proves it. If you risk 1% of your capital on each trade, you can lose 10 times in a row and still be alive. If you risk 10%, you can blow out in 10 trades. And when you go broke, it's not just money that's gone, it's time, experience, and self-trust. That's the silent cost of poor proportion. You lose the ability to operate with freedom. Every decision becomes heavier because every trade could be the last. When I finally accepted this truth, my entire rhythm changed. I stopped, feeling the need to chase every tick. I waited for the moments when the market lined up with my method, and I bet small enough to survive being wrong, but large enough to matter when I was right. That balance, that quiet discipline turned my trading from chaos into order. Here's the paradox. The smaller your risk, the longer your future. And the longer your future, the bigger your eventual wins. That's the law of proportion. It's not about making less, it's about making sure you'll still be here to make more. Now, once I understood proportion, once I learned that my capital was a weapon to be used sparingly, not squandered on every impulse, I began to see another truth forming beneath it. It wasn't just about how much to risk. It was about when to increase it, because even the right size at the wrong time can destroy you. The next lesson changed everything for me. It's what separates the operator from the amateur. It's the law of confirmation. Add only to winners. Let's talk about that next. Here's something that took me years of loss and frustration to learn. The market never confirms your opinion. It only confirms your position. What I mean by that is simple. You don't get paid for being right in theory. You get paid when the market itself begins to move in your favor. Until that moment, everything you think, believe, or predict means nothing. When I was young and hungry, I thought confidence was enough. I'd see a setup, feel the pull of conviction, and go in heavy right away, expecting the market to move because I judged it correctly. But the market doesn't move because you're smart. It moves because enough other participants are proving your idea right through action. And until that happens, your opinion is a liability. That's why I developed what I call the law of confirmation, the discipline of adding only to winners. You see, the average trader adds to losers out of hope and fear, but the professional adds to winners out of proof and timing. The average man thinks he's buying value when he averages down, but what he's really buying is trouble. I've done it myself. I remember holding a position that started to turn against me, and instead of admitting the market had proven me wrong, I told myself I was getting a better price. That kind of reasoning has buried more traders than bad luck ever will. Every dollar you add to a losing trade increases your hope and decreases your flexibility. You start arguing with the tape, begging it to reverse instead of accepting what it's already telling you. The right way, the only way, is to add only after the market confirms your initial position. When you buy a stock and it begins to move in your favor, that's not just luck. That's the market agreeing with your judgment. That's when you have the right to increase size slowly, carefully, proportionally. You don't throw your whole reserve in just because it's moving. You pyramid your way up, each addition smaller than the one before, each step based on confirmation, not emotion. This is how I built my biggest positions quietly, methodically, without forcing the issue. During my Great Bear campaign of 1,929, I didn't short the entire market in one swing. I tested the ground, started small, watched for weakness, and when the market confirmed, I pressed my advantage. That's how a speculator operates. He doesn't gamble on what should happen. He waits for the market to prove what is happening. Here's what most people misunderstand. Pyramiding isn't about greed. It's about discipline. You're not trying to squeeze every last dollar out of a move. You're scaling into strength. It's the opposite of gambling. It's engineering. It's method. The first position is your test, your scout. The market's reaction to that scout tells you everything you need to know. If it goes against you, pull back. If it goes with you, you've earned the right to reinforce. That's confirmation. I'll tell you a story that's burned into my mind. There was a time early in my career when I shorted a stock because I was sure the top was in. The price had risen too fast, too far, and I wanted to be the man who caught the turn. I was early, not wrong in theory, just early in practice. The stock moved against me, but instead of cutting the loss, I told myself I was too early to be wrong, so I added more. The price kept rising. I added again. By the time the real top came weeks later, I was already broke, mentally and financially. The irony was, I'd been right all along, but my timing was wrong, and my sizing was reckless. The market doesn't pay for being early, it punishes it. That's the cost of ignoring confirmation. When you learn to add only to winners, everything changes. You stop chasing, stop averaging down, stop confusing activity with progress. You begin to realize that the safest time to risk more is when you're already right, not when you're desperate to fix being wrong. It sounds simple, but it took me half a lifetime to really understand it. And there's another side to this law, one that's even harder to master, knowing when to stop adding. Success in the market breeds overconfidence faster than anything else. When a position goes your way, you start to believe you're invincible, that the move will never end, that the market is finally rewarding your genius. That's when greed sneaks in wearing a mask that looks like courage. It whispers, "You're on fire. Keep going." But every move ends. Every trend exhausts itself. Every campaign has a point where adding more turns from mastery into madness. I learned to read that exhaustion in the tape, subtle changes in volume, price hesitation, the rhythm of the market slowing. When that happened, I stopped adding, even if the move looked strong. I'd tell myself, the next trade is not about squeezing the last dollar, it's about keeping the dollars you've already made. That mindset kept me alive while others went down with their ships. So here's the rule. Never average down, always add smaller, and stop adding the moment you feel certainty growing faster than discipline. The goal is not to build the biggest position, it's to build the right one. But pyramiding is only half of this law. The other half is the hardest lesson every trader faces, the discipline of inaction. Once you've built the right position, the real test begins. Can you sit tight? Most traders can't. They can find an entry, take a profit, or suffer a loss, but what they can't do is nothing. And yet, that's where the real money is made, not in the buying or the selling, but in the waiting. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The big money isn't made by the man who trades every move. It's made by the man who has the patience to sit through the noise. Once you're in line with the market's major trend, the smartest thing you can do is let it run its course. I learned this the hard way in my early years. I'd enter a trade, watch it move in my favor, and then, at the first sign of profit, I'd sell. The tape would keep climbing after I was out, and I'd stand there watching the profits I should have made disappear without me. It took me a long time to realize that fear was the culprit. Not fear of being wrong, but fear of giving back. That fear robbed me of more profits than any losing trade ever did. Let me tell you about a day that changed my entire view on sitting tight. It was in my commodity trading days, wheat and cotton. I had long positions in both, but I let my emotions dictate the management. The cotton showed me a small loss. The wheat showed a nice profit. I sold the wheat to lock in my gain and held the cotton, hoping it would turn. You can already guess what happened. The wheat kept rising without me, and the cotton sank even lower. That one decision taught me more than any book or teacher ever could. I learned that your winners need time, and your losers need finality. Every time I acted on emotion, I reversed that rule and I paid the price. The discipline of inaction isn't laziness. It's strength. It's having the patience to let time work in your favor. The market rewards endurance. It punishes interference. When you've sized correctly, confirmed your position, and entered with precision, there's nothing more to do but wait. The hardest part is trusting that doing nothing is the right move. But that's where professionalism begins. A gambler reacts to every tick. An operator observes. A gambler needs excitement. An operator needs clarity. Think of it like a farmer planting a field. Once the seeds are in the ground, he doesn't dig them up every day to check their roots. He tends to the conditions, watches the weather, and waits for the harvest. That's how you must treat your trades. Each one is a seed. Give it space, let it grow, and don't ruin the soil by constantly tampering with it. When the market confirms your position, your job is to let the confirmation do its work. So when I say sitting tight, I don't mean you doze off while your trade runs. I mean you sit with awareness. You watch the rhythm, not the tick. You stay alert, but detached. You only act when the tape tells you the move has matured. Until then, you let time multiply your edge. That's the paradox of mastery. The less you interfere, the more you earn. This is what separates professionals from the restless crowd. They can sit still. They can hold when it's hard. They can trust their own process instead of chasing every fluctuation. Once you develop that kind of patience, you'll notice something else. Your stress disappears. The anxiety that once controlled your decisions fades because you finally understand that you don't need to predict. You only need to endure. And once you can do that, the market starts to feel different. It's no longer a place of chaos, but of rhythm. You can sense the flow of prices, the breath of trends, the pauses before turns. You stop reacting and start aligning. That's why I say, the hardest work a trader ever does is learning when not to work. So now we've come full circle on this idea. First, learning to add to winners with precision. And second, learning when to stop touching a good thing. Together they form the law of confirmation, the foundation of every campaign I ever ran. But as powerful as these ideas are, they mean nothing if you don't also know how to lose. Because no matter how perfect your timing, how small your size, or how strong your patience, you will lose sometimes. And when that happens, how you handle it will define your entire future in speculation. In the next section, we're going to talk about the one rule that's hardest for traders to obey, the law of limitation, cutting losses instantly and without hesitation. This is where the amateurs turn into professionals, or vanish for good. Here's a truth most people spend their whole trading life trying not to face: you will lose. You'll be wrong, sometimes often, sometimes painfully. You'll read the tape right and still be early. You'll spot the turn and still enter too late. You'll sit through what looked like a perfect setup only to watch it unravel in front of you. Losses aren't proof of failure. They're the tuition the market charges for experience. The only question that matters is not if you'll lose, but how much and how fast. That's the law of limitation. and every operator who survives long enough to call himself seasoned learns to honor it like scripture. I learned it the hardest way there is, through stubbornness. Early in my career, I had what I thought were good reasons to hold a losing position. I'd tell myself the market was wrong, not me. I'd convince myself it would come back because it had to. Nothing has to happen in the market except what does happen. The market doesn't owe you logic, it doesn't owe you a rebound, and it doesn't owe you mercy. It'll go higher or lower without knowing or caring whether you're aboard. The moment you start arguing with that fact, you've already crossed from speculation into self-delusion, and self-delusion is fatal. I remember one trade that carved this lesson into my bones. I was long cotton and wheat at the same time. The wheat was moving my way, climbing with steady strength. The cotton started slipping, but instead of cutting it loose, I held on. I told myself I was giving it room, that the weakness was temporary, that patience was discipline, but discipline and denial are cousins that wear the same face until it's too late to tell them apart. I sold my wheat too early to lock in a profit, and I held the cotton hoping to get back to even. The wheat kept rising for weeks. The cotton sank further and further until I had no choice but to cut it. I'd violated my own rule: always sell what shows a loss and keep what shows a profit. That one reversal of logic cost me more than money. It cost me confidence. And confidence, once shaken, is slower to recover than capital. Most traders don't realize how simple the math of ruin really is. Lose 10%, you need 11 to get back. Lose 50%, you need 100. Lose everything, and you need a miracle. Every large loss begins as a small one someone refused to take. It's a slippery slope that starts with a single phrase: "I'll give it a little more room." Those are the 6 words that have emptied more accounts than any crash or panic. The longer you let a bad trade linger, the more power it gains over your mind. It stops being a trade and starts being a hope. And hope, in the market, is the most expensive addiction there is. What I finally understood was this: taking a small loss is not punishment, it's protection. It's an insurance policy you pay to stay in business. You wouldn't let a fire burn half your house just because you didn't want to pay the insurance premium. Yet that's what traders do every day when they refuse to close a losing position. They tell themselves they're being patient, when in truth they're afraid to admit they were wrong. Admitting error hurts the ego, but ignoring it costs the account. The professionals accept pain early to avoid agony later. The amateurs hide from small discomfort until it grows into disaster. You have to train yourself to see every stop, every cut loss, every deliberate exit as an act of strength. That's the mark of a professional, not how big he wins, but how small he loses. You have to learn to swing your blade cleanly, like a surgeon removing infection before it spreads. I've seen men hesitate and watch an infection consume their entire capital base. By the time they acted, it was too late. I've also seen quiet, disciplined operators take a string of small losses without a flicker of emotion, knowing that the same discipline that limited their losses would eventually protect their profits. The difference between the two is night and day. One trades for excitement, the other for longevity. And there's a deeper level to this law. It's not just about cutting financial losses, it's about cutting emotional ones. Every losing trade you nurse out of pride drains a little more clarity from your mind. You stop seeing the market for what it is and start seeing it as a reflection of yourself. You start trying to prove something. That's poison. Once I learned to take losses cleanly, I found I could think again. I could observe without bias, decide without fear. Each stopped-out trade became a release, not a wound. It was a reset, a way to step back, clear the fog, and prepare for the next opportunity. There's no better feeling in this business than knowing a bad trade can't hurt you. That's freedom. It's what allows you to play this game for decades instead of months. It's what separates the old guard, the true operators, from the crowd that flashes through the market and vanishes after their first big drawdown. Cutting losses is an act of courage, not defeat. It's saying, I value my future more than my pride. It's saying, I'd rather take a controlled wound today than bleed to death tomorrow. It's the kind of discipline that seems cold from the outside, but feels like clarity on the inside. When you can execute a stop without hesitation, you've finally taken emotion out of the process. You've made the transition from participant to professional. And once you make that shift, you'll notice something surprising. Cutting losses doesn't make you more cautious. It makes you fearless, because you know exactly where you'll stop. You stop fearing the unknown. You stop flinching at every tick. You stop reacting. You start operating. That's why I tell traders, the smaller your losses, the larger your confidence. The smaller your fear, the larger your control. And once you've learned control, the market stops being a battlefield and starts being a business. So remember this, a small loss is tuition, a big loss is fatal. Every loss you cut quickly is a lesson you survive to apply later. Every loss you let grow is a teacher you'll never meet again because you'll already be out of the game. You'd think that cutting losses quickly would make a man cautious, but the truth is it does the opposite. Once you've built the habit of limitation, you stop dreading the unknown. You realize that your survival no longer depends on being right, it depends on acting right. And when you know that, you stop trading from fear and start trading from clarity. And that brings us to the next great law, the law of control. Because once you've mastered your capital, the next thing you have to master is yourself. The mistake that costs traders their fortune doesn't start on a chart, it starts in their mind. Let's talk about how to control that next. The truth is, no rule about position size or stops will save you if your mind remains undisciplined. Every chart, every plan, every number you calculate still has to pass through your own head before it reaches the market. And if that head is full of fear, greed, revenge, or pride, you'll sabotage yourself long before the market ever has the chance. I learned this the hard way, not from losing a fortune, but from watching how I behaved after I lost. The real danger wasn't the loss itself. It was the reaction, the anger, the impatience, the compulsion to get it back. That's when I realized the greatest risk in speculation isn't market risk. It's emotional risk. You can have perfect analysis, perfect timing, perfect risk management, and still fail if you can't master your own impulses. The market exposes everything in you. Your patience, your arrogance, your need for control, your fear of missing out. It's the most honest mirror you'll ever look into. It doesn't lie. It just reflects your internal state in dollar signs. Every time I thought I'd conquered it, the market would hand me a lesson that showed I still had work to do. And what made it even more humbling was realizing that no matter how much money I made, I'd never beat the market. I could only beat myself. In my prime, I lived by routines. Before every trading day, I'd sit alone, far from the noise of the customer's room. I didn't want opinions. I didn't want gossip or tips or chatter. I wanted silent space to think, to see the market clearly without the emotional contamination of the crowd. Most people don't realize how dangerous noise is. You think you're just listening, but you're actually absorbing the crowd's fear and greed. And once that gets inside you, it colors everything you see. One nervous remark, one excited rumor, and you'll start looking for reasons to act when you should be sitting still. That's why I isolated myself. Not because I disliked people, but because I knew the crowd's emotions were contagious, and I couldn't afford the infection. I used to say, the big money is not in the buying or the selling, but in the waiting. What I meant wasn't just patience in a trade, it was patience in myself, waiting for the right moment to act, waiting for my emotions to cool, waiting for the market to confirm. That waiting is what most people can't stand. They crave action, the way a gambler craves the next hand. But the professional speculator doesn't trade for excitement, he trades for precision. I kept detailed records of every trade I made, not just the entries and exits, but what I was feeling at the time. Was I anxious, confident, tired, impatient? You'd be amazed how much your mood predicts your mistakes. If I saw a string of losing trades all made on days when I felt restless, I didn't need to change my system. I needed to change me. That's what I mean when I say the mind is capital. Your mental state is as real an asset as your account balance. If you don't protect it, you're already bankrupt. The way I protected mine was through structure. Every morning, before the market opened, I'd review my positions and my plan. I'd write down what would make me add, what would make me cut, and what would make me stay out. Once the bell rang, I followed those rules like law. Because the moment you start making decisions in real time, while your heart's pounding and prices are jumping, your objectivity is gone. You're no longer operating, you're reacting. And reaction is the death of professionalism. I remember one morning during a bull campaign when I felt that old urge, the itch to act just to prove I was still sharp. There was no signal, no reason to enter. but the tape was alive and the market felt electric. I, I wanted to participate. That's the drug. Every trader fights the need to do something. I caught myself just in time. I stepped back, walked out of the office, and went for a long drive instead. That restraint probably saved me a fortune. The market reversed that afternoon and wiped out anyone who'd bought impulsively. It wasn't luck. It was control. And here's the strange thing: once you master control, the market becomes quiet. Not literally, but internally. The noise doesn't affect you the same way. You can see moves developing without being pulled into them. You can sense tension building and wait for release. You can stand aside while others panic or chase. You realize that you don't need to trade constantly to make money. You need to trade correctly when the time is right. That calmness is what real mastery feels like. Think of it like a pilot flying through turbulence. The rookie clutches the controls, jerks the wheel, overreacts to every bump. The veteran trusts his instruments. He knows that panic only makes the plane harder to steady. He focuses on the data, not the noise. That's what emotional control in the market looks like. You don't fight every move. You observe, you trust your process, and you adjust when necessary, not when scared. This mental control also means detaching your ego from your trades. The market doesn't care who you are or what you believe. It doesn't reward your effort. It rewards your accuracy. I used to take losses personally. I thought a losing trade meant I was wrong as a man, not just wrong in judgment. That kind of thinking is poison. Once you detach, you stop seeking validation from wins, and you stop feeling humiliation from losses. They're just outcomes, feedback from the system, nothing more, nothing less. That's freedom when your self-worth isn't tied to your account balance. And I'll tell you this: the moment you achieve that mental stillness, you start to see the rhythm of the market itself. You stop chasing random noise and start recognizing patterns of movement, energy, and exhaustion. You begin to sense the relationship between time and price, the same way I wrote about in my own trading formula. You can feel when the market is in harmony and when it's disjointed. That sensitivity only comes when your emotions are quiet enough to hear what the tape is really saying. Now that you understand control, the ability to steady your own hand and calm your own mind, it's time to talk about rhythm. Because professional speculation isn't about rigid systems or endless analysis. It's about flow, the ability to move with the market instead of against it. When I talk about rhythm, I'm talking about timing, proportion, and size, all dancing together in one motion. The amateur pushes, the professional flows. To operate with rhythm, you must first learn to observe without impatience. The market is like the ocean, always in motion, never in a straight line. It swells, it pauses, it breaks, it retreats. If you try to fight its rhythm, you'll drown. The way to profit is to watch the tide long enough to understand when it's turning. That's where my formula of time and price came from. I noticed that movements take time to build before they take price along with them. When I waited for both to align, when the time element and the price element confirmed each other, my trades began to feel effortless. It wasn't magic, it was rhythm. I'd start small, test the current, and if the market confirmed, I'd add a little more, but only when the flow remained steady. The moment I sensed resistance, hesitation in the tape, exhaustion in volume, I'd stop. You can't force the market to keep moving any more than you can force the sea to stay calm. You must respond to what is, not what you wish it to be. Every morning before I traded, I studied the world. I read the news, the commodity reports, the rail earnings, the foreign exchanges. I wanted to understand the conditions shaping the undercurrent of speculation. I wasn't trading headlines. I was mapping rhythm. When I entered the market after that kind of preparation, I wasn't guessing. I was aligning. That's what I mean when I say operate. Don't gamble. A gambler acts because he hopes something will happen. An operator acts because he's seen enough evidence that it already is happening. I remember one week when the whole street was convinced the market had topped. Prices had fallen sharply for 3 days, and everyone was short. But when I looked at the tape, I saw something different. The selling pressure was fading. The volume was drying up, and each new low was met with quicker buying. The rhythm was shifting from weakness to strength. While the crowd held on to their bearish conviction, I flipped. I started buying small. When the reversal came, it was violent. The same traders who'd been smug 3 days earlier were scrambling to cover. My rhythm had kept me on the right side because I'd listened, not argued. Trading in rhythm means you don't react to every tick. You let the market show its hand. You become like a conductor leading an orchestra. You don't rush the tempo. You guide it. When the instruments are in sync, you move with confidence. When they're out of tune, you wait. That's professional speculation harmony between timing, size, and temperament. And when you learn to operate this way, something remarkable happens. You stop feeling anxious about missing trades. You stop worrying about what you can't control. You start realizing that your job isn't to predict every note, but to catch the melody when it starts playing your song. That calm alignment is what I lived for. It's what made speculation a science rather than a gamble. Now, once all these laws, survival, proportion, confirmation, limitation, and control begin to work together, a trader reaches a different place entirely. A place where size is no longer a threat but an instrument. A place where discipline gives you freedom instead of restraint. Let's talk about that next. The law of freedom, where all the others meet. Freedom in speculation isn't about having no limits. It's about knowing exactly where your limits are and being perfectly at peace within them. When you first come to the market, you think freedom means making as much as you want whenever you want. You think it's about breaking the rules, taking big chances, and proving you're braver than the next man. But that kind of freedom is just another prison, a golden cage built from ego and impulse. The more you chase it, the more it owns you. True freedom, the kind that lasts through bull and bear markets alike, comes from control. It comes from discipline so precise that it feels effortless. It's when your rules are so deeply a part of you that following them isn't a burden, it's a relief. There's a strange thing that happens when you've been trading long enough and you've burned through enough illusions. You stop feeling excitement about single trades. You stop daydreaming about the next big win. You start thinking in terms of decades, not days. The money stops being the prize. What you crave is mastery, the calm that comes from knowing you're operating with absolute consistency, no matter what the market throws at you. That's freedom. You're no longer reacting to fear or greed. You're no longer chasing the crowd or running from losses. You're just executing. Precise. Unshaken. I used to think I wanted wealth. I really wanted control. I wanted to be able to stand in the middle of a storm and feel steady while others were losing their nerve. I wanted to know that no panic could touch me. No sudden move could throw me off balance. And when I finally achieved that, when I could sit quietly while others shouted, when I could hold my position without trembling, I realized I'd finally become free. The market was no longer something outside of me to conquer. It had become a reflection of my own mind. When I was steady, it rewarded me. When I was reckless, it punished me. It was never the market that changed, it was me. Freedom is structure. That's the paradox most traders never grasp. They think rules will box them in, that discipline will dull their instincts. But in truth, rules remove confusion. Discipline removes fear. Once you know exactly how much to risk, where to enter, when to add, and when to cut, the noise disappears. You can finally focus on the only thing that matters: execution. And when execution becomes second nature, you no longer feel trapped by decisions. You act without hesitation, because you've already made every decision in advance. That's not confinement. That's liberation. I remember once during a bull run, I had a massive position, the kind that would terrify most men. But I wasn't afraid. My stops were in place. My pyramids were measured. My risk was calculated down to the penny. Every possible outcome had been considered before I ever entered the trade. The market could do what it pleased, and I could do nothing but follow my plan. That's real freedom. Not the illusion of control, but the acceptance that you don't need it. You're free because you've already surrendered to your own discipline. When you trade this way, size stops being dangerous. It becomes a tool, an extension of your conviction, not a measure of your ego. Every trader wants to trade large, but few can handle the weight. Large positions amplify everything inside you: your strengths, your weaknesses, your fears, your patience. The man who isn't emotionally steady will crumble under that pressure. But when you've mastered the laws that come before survival, proportion, confirmation, limitation, control, size transforms from a threat into power. It becomes a way to express alignment with the market's rhythm. You're no longer forcing outcomes. You're participating in them. I used to watch young traders on the street with that gleam in their eye, the hunger to make it big fast. I'd tell them, "You'll get your size when you can handle your losses." Most of them didn't understand. They thought I meant they'd earn it financially. What I really meant was psychological. You can't command large positions until you're emotionally detached enough to lose small ones with grace. You earn the right to size up through humility, not bravado. The market senses arrogance like blood in the water. Freedom also means clarity, the kind that comes only when you stop caring about being right. I've seen too many traders destroy themselves trying to defend their opinions. The market isn't a debate to win, it's a rhythm to follow. Once you let go of the need to predict and instead commit to responding, you gain something far more valuable than pride. You gain adaptability. That's the essence of freedom. You can move with the flow instead of against it. You can shift when the market shifts without hesitation, without drama, without guilt. And let me tell you, that kind of freedom doesn't just change your trading, it changes your life. You start to carry the same discipline into everything you do. You learn to keep emotional distance from events, to see things as they are instead of how you wish they'd be. You stop chasing highs and running from discomfort. You become measured, deliberate, patient. The market teaches you that control isn't about suppressing emotion, it's about directing it. Once you internalize that lesson, you move through life with the same calm precision you use in speculation. I remember sitting in my office after one of my best campaigns, when the numbers on paper would have made any man giddy. But I didn't feel excitement, I felt peace. Because the profit wasn't proof of intelligence or luck. It was proof of order, proof that my method, my patience, my restraint, and my courage had all worked together exactly as planned. That feeling, quiet, steady, complete, that's the freedom every trader seeks but few ever find. It's not the freedom of endless gain. It's the freedom of composure. The freedom to lose without panic, to win without arrogance, to wait without boredom, to act without hesitation. The market stops being a roller coaster and becomes a mirror of your discipline. That's the final step of mastery, when discipline feels like instinct, when patience feels like power, when freedom feels like calm. So remember, freedom doesn't come when you have enough money to stop trading. It comes when you have enough control to keep trading without fear. It's when you look at the market and see not danger or excitement, but simply opportunity, some for today, some for tomorrow, and some best left untouched. You know exactly who you are, what you'll do, and what you'll never do. That's the quiet confidence of the true operator. Now that we've reached this point, the end of the road where all the laws converge, let me leave you with this. You don't trade the market, you trade yourself. The laws of survival, proportion, confirmation, limitation, control, and freedom aren't really about the market at all. They're about human nature. They're about mastering the part of yourself that the market constantly exposes. Once you've done that, once you've learned to think clearly, act decisively, and stay calm through every kind of weather, you've already won long before the profit shows up in your account. And that brings me to our next conversation, one that builds directly on everything we've discussed here. Because once you've learned to control your size and your emotions, the next question is timing. How do you know when a stock is ready to move? How do you recognize that moment, that flash of confirmation, when it's time to strike? That's what we'll talk about next. Timing isn't prediction, it's recognition. And when you understand it, you'll see the rhythm of price itself, as clearly as if it were breathing. So stay with me, because what comes next is where precision meets intuition, and where the operator becomes truly complete. When all is said and done, after the long years of study, the cycles of gain and loss, the sleepless nights, the self-doubt, the flashes of triumph that vanish as fast as they came, you come to understand that speculation, in its purest form, isn't about the market at all. It's about the man. The market is merely the stage. The real play unfolds inside your own mind. Every tick, every trade, every decision is a test of temperament. You spend years thinking you're learning how to read prices, but what you're really learning is how to read yourself, your impulses, your fears, your limits. The price tape doesn't lie. It has no opinion. It simply records your judgment in real time. Every entry says, "This is who I am today." Every exit says, "This is who I've become." I've lived long enough to know that most people don't lose money because they lack intelligence. They lose because they lack discipline. They think the market is an opponent to outsmart when, in truth, it's a mirror. It reflects whatever you bring to it. Bring greed, and it'll feed your greed until you choke on it. Bring fear, and it'll confirm every one of your doubts until you freeze. But bring patience, structure, control, and it will reward you with the only thing worth having: mastery. Because mastery is not about winning every trade, it's about never being destroyed by any single one. There's something deeply humbling about realizing that the same rules that kept me alive in 1907, in 1929, in every panic and every rally, still hold true today. The faces change, the technologies change, the noise grows louder but human. Nature doesn't evolve in the pits or on the screens. Men still hope when they should fear, and fear when they should hope. They still overtrade, overthink, and overreact. The game has changed only in speed, not in substance. The tape may move faster now, but the emotions behind it still beat in the same rhythm. That's why these laws endure, because they aren't market laws. They're human laws. If I could strip this business down to its essence, it would be this: protect your capital, size with proportion, add to proof, not hope, cut every loss without hesitation, control your emotions like a craftsman controls his tools, and let that control free you from the madness that swallows the crowd. Follow those principles, and you won't need to predict. You'll only need to observe. You won't need to fight. You'll only need to wait. You won't need to gamble. You'll only need to execute. I've been rich and I've been broke, and I can tell you without hesitation, the real wealth isn't in the money. It's in the clarity that comes after you've lost enough times to stop pretending you're smarter than the market. Once you've been stripped of arrogance, of ego, of illusions, you begin to see clearly. You start to trade not for excitement, not for revenge, not for recognition, but for precision. You begin to enjoy the stillness between moves. You start to find pride in doing nothing when there's nothing to do. You measure success not by how often you win, but by how well you behave when you're losing. That's when you finally become a professional. There's a moment in every trader's journey. It might come after his first big win, or his 10th big loss, when he realizes the market doesn't care. It's not against him or for him. It simply is. And in that realization comes peace. The game doesn't have to be conquered. It has to be understood. Once you accept that, you stop trying to bend it to your will and start learning to be rice, flow with its rhythm. You size properly. You wait for confirmation. You limit your losses. You control your mind. And you find freedom in that rhythm. That's the cycle, the circle that every operator must complete before he can truly call himself one. So, as I leave you with these thoughts, I'll say this one last time: the market will always test you. It will test your patience, your discipline, your conviction, your humility. It will strip away everything that's weak and false until only what's real remains. If you're honest enough to face those tests and still come back, you'll have learned what speculation truly is: not a gamble, not a game, but a study in human nature and endurance. And if you've made it this far, you already understand that. You've felt the highs and the lows, the frustration of being right and still losing, the quiet thrill of finally getting it right. You've survived the pain most people never admit to, and you're still here. That means you have what matters most: persistence. Because persistence, coupled with discipline, is the real secret. Everything else is timing. So, before you take your next trade, remember this: don't ask if the market is right or wrong. Ask if you are prepared. Don't ask if this stock will move. Ask if you will survive if it doesn't. That mindset will carry you farther than any signal or system ever could. Now, if you've absorbed this, if you understand that position sizing isn't just arithmetic but psychology, that risk management isn't just math but mastery, then you're ready for the next stage. The next step is timing. How to recognize when the market is finally ready to reward your preparation. That's what I'll show you next. The rhythm of price itself, the pulse of opportunity. Because once you've learned to size with discipline, the only thing left is to know when to strike. You've built your foundation. Now it's time to build your precision. Click through to the next lesson, and I'll take you there inside the market's heartbeat, where everything slows down just enough for the trained eye to see what others miss. Until then, remember, survival is strength, proportion is balance, confirmation is proof, limitation is protection, control is mastery, and freedom is peace. The rest is just noise. There's a quiet truth you only understand when you've been in the market long enough to see everything twice. The same panic, the same euphoria, the same headlines dressed in new language. In the beginning, you think every cycle is new, every turn unprecedented. But after a while, you start recognizing the faces of old mistakes wearing modern clothes. It's almost comforting, in a strange way, to realize that nothing really changes except the participants. Human nature doesn't evolve as fast as technology does, and that's why the same rules that guided me through ticker tape and telegraphs still guide you through digital screens and algorithms. You and I are playing the same game, the only difference is the speed at which it tempts us to forget the lessons. When I was a young operator, I used to live by the market's tempo. Every move on the tape felt personal, urgent, immediate. I'd pace my office like a caged animal, waiting for the next price to print, waiting for the next swing to prove my genius or my stupidity. But over the years, that urgency burned itself out. I realized that the market doesn't reward speed. It rewards stillness, not inactivity stillness. The ability to wait without tension, to act without haste, to think without noise. That's the final discipline, and it's the hardest of all to learn because it feels like doing nothing. But in that nothing, everything happens. The man who can stand still while others rush will always see further. There's a story I never told in full about a young trader who once asked me, "What does it feel like to win $1 million?" I told him, "It feels like nothing." He thought I was joking, but I wasn't. The first time you make real money, it feels electric. The 10th time, it feels inevitable. The 100th time, it feels normal. But what never changes, what keeps you alive, is the respect for what you could lose. The moment you stop feeling that respect, you're already on your way down. The great irony is that the men who make the most money are the ones who no longer chase it. They chase consistency, control, the quiet satisfaction of doing it right. The money becomes a byproduct, not the purpose. You have to learn to love the process more than the outcome, because the outcome is fickle. One day you're rich, the next you're rebuilding. The process, though, the structure, the patience, the rhythm, that's what stays with you. I used to go home after a good day and feel calm, not excited. I'd review my trades, see that I'd followed my rules, and that was enough. The days when I broke discipline, even if I made money, I couldn't sleep. That's how I knew I'd crossed from gambling to professionalism. When peace of mind mattered more than profit, I'd finally learned what the game was teaching me all along. I wish more people understood that speculation isn't a sprint. It's a lifetime apprenticeship in patience. You don't master it in a year or even a decade. You grow into it, one mistake at a time. You learn humility from drawdowns, wisdom from boredom, restraint from regret. The market doesn't just test your knowledge, it tests your character. Every loss is a lesson in honesty. Every gain is a lesson in responsibility. Every day you survive is proof you've learned at least a little. And the beautiful thing about this game, the reason I never walked away from it even after I could have, is that it's infinite. There's always another pattern to study, another law to refine, another flaw in yourself to correct. The market never runs out of ways to teach you who you really are. You could spend 100 years in it and still find new corners of your own psychology to explore. That's what keeps it alive, not the profit, not the fame, not the thrill, but the pursuit of refinement. I sometimes think back to those early days, the chalk dust on my fingers from writing prices on the bucket shop board, the noise of the telegraph clicking, the thrill of watching a line of numbers rise and fall. Everything was simpler then, but also harder. There were no computers, no instant data, just instinct and memory. But in a strange way, that made it purer. The game demanded all of you, your observation, your patience, your nerve. You couldn't hide behind a machine. You had to trust your own judgment, and you had to live with its consequences. And that's still the truth today, even if the tools have changed. The screens may glow brighter, but the decisions are still made in silence, alone, in that split second between impulse and discipline. If I could offer one piece of advice to the next generation of traders, it would be this: never confuse movement with progress. The market rewards the man who waits for the moment when everything aligns: price, time, emotion, and position. Until that moment, every action is just noise. Learn to love the waiting. Learn to take pride in restraint. Learn to respect your stops and your limits, not as walls, but as guardrails that keep you free to act again tomorrow. You'll hear people talk about the market like it's a puzzle to solve, or an enemy to defeat, or a mystery to unlock. It's none of those things. It's a mirror. It reflects your habits, your flaws, your strengths. You don't conquer it. You understand it by understanding yourself. And if you're honest enough, humble enough, disciplined enough to keep learning, it'll teach you everything you need to know, not just about trading, but about life itself. Because life, like the perfect market, has its own rhythm. You can't force it. You can't time it perfectly. You can only align yourself with its flow, prepare when it's quiet, act when it moves, protect yourself when it turns against you, and wait with patience when nothing's happening. That's not just trading, that's existence. So wherever you are in your journey, whether you're rebuilding after losses or standing at the edge of a breakthrough, remember this: you don't need to conquer the market. You only need to master yourself. That's the only game worth winning. Everything else is just price action. When you understand that, when you truly live by it, you'll stop trading like a man chasing wealth and start trading like a man building wisdom. And that wisdom, once earned, can never be taken from you. That's the only permanent profit there is. If you've listened this far, you already understand that the market isn't about speed or prediction, it's about endurance. But there's something deeper still, something that comes only after years of immersion, a kind of still point that exists beyond winning and losing, beyond fear and excitement. You can't force it. It comes quietly, like dawn breaking over an empty city. It's the moment when you realize that speculation isn't about struggle anymore. It's about rhythm, observation, and calm execution. You stop seeing the market as something to fight or conquer and start seeing it as something to hear. You recognize the pauses between movements, the breath between impulses. That's the moment when all the noise of the crowd fades away, and what's left is clarity, clean, sharp, unhurried clarity. It takes a long time to reach that place. You can't get there through greed or fear, or through ambition alone. You get there by burning through all of that, by losing, rebuilding, losing again, learning the same lesson from different angles until it finally sticks. In the beginning, every trader thinks he'll find freedom in profit. Later, if he survives long enough, he finds freedom in detachment. He realizes that the real luxury isn't money, it's mental stillness, the ability to look at a moving market and feel absolutely nothing except focus. That's the apex of this business. It doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It looks like a man sitting quietly, watching, waiting, moving rarely but decisively. Inside, though, it's something closer to peace. I remember once, years after I'd already been through everything a man could go through in the market booms, busts, fortunes made and lost, I sat in my office one morning and just listened to the ticker, not for the numbers, but for the cadence, the rhythm of buying and selling, the subtle shift in pace that told me more about sentiment than any newspaper ever could. It struck me then that I wasn't even thinking about the prices themselves. I was listening to the psychology behind them, the fear, the hesitation, the bursts of courage and panic. That's when I realized that what I was really trading was human behavior. The market is just a mechanism. The mind is the motive force. Once you learn to see that, you're no longer trading companies or commodities or charts, you're trading emotion crystallized into price. That understanding changes everything. It softens the edges. You stop getting angry when the market goes against you, because you understand it's just human nature in motion. You stop feeling euphoria when you're right, because you know it's temporary. You start to see the long sweep of things, how patience, not prediction, creates fortune. You recognize that every panic eventually fades, every bubble eventually bursts, and what remains afterward is always the same. Those who preserved discipline outlast those who chased excitement. The faces change, but the outcome never does. That's what I mean by the still point, the mental state where you're no longer pulled by the extremes. You trade, you win, You lose, but through it all you remain centered. You might have your moments of excitement, but they pass quickly because you've built a deeper foundation, a philosophy, not a strategy. And that philosophy keeps you steady no matter how violent the market becomes. To reach that state, you have to let go of needing the market to make you feel anything. You have to let go of revenge trading, of proving yourself, of chasing validation. You have to let go of the story that you're one big win away from a rival. You have to accept that you're already there, right now, in the work, in the process, in the discipline. Once you stop trying to force the market to give you meaning, you start finding meaning in your own restraint, and that's when you stop being a participant and start being an operator. When you've reached that point, you can trade in any environment. Bull or bear, panic or euphoria, it's all the same to you. You're not excited, you're not afraid, you're just prepared. You can watch opportunity pass without flinching because you know more will come. You can take losses without hesitation because you know they're part of the rhythm. That's real professionalism, the kind that looks like calm indifference but is really a form of mastery. I wish I could tell you there's a shortcut to that calm, but there isn't. You have to earn it trade by trade, mistake by mistake. You have to endure the years when you think you've learned everything, only to realize you've barely started. You have to accept that knowledge alone won't save you, only discipline will. And if you can live through all that without giving up, without losing the quiet curiosity that keeps you observing, you'll wake up one day and realize you've found it, that still point in the middle of the storm where everything makes sense, not because the market has changed, but because you have. And maybe that's what I've been trying to tell you all along, that all these rules, the law of survival, proportion, confirmation, limitation, control, freedom, they're not steps on a ladder to riches, they're steps on a ladder to peace. Because when you master the game, you stop playing it for money and start playing it for clarity. You start to love the structure that once frustrated you because it's the structure that sets you free. You stop chasing highs and fearing lows because you finally understand that both are necessary to stay balanced. So wherever you find yourself, whether you're fighting through a string of losses or sitting on a stretch of quiet profits, know that every moment in the market is a teacher. Every trade, even the bad ones, is bringing you closer to that still point, if you're honest enough to listen. And when you finally get there, when you can look at a wild, unpredictable market and feel nothing but steady focus, that's when you'll know you've arrived, not at the end of your journey, but at the beginning of mastery.